How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we're going to talk about undue familiarity with staff and an inmate. Guys, undue familiarity is a lot different than corruption. Undue familiarity is usually what leads to corruption. Not 100% of the time, but most of the time. Undue familiarity would be more considered unethical behavior, and it's usually more subtle, not so easily noticed. So we're hoping today's show will kind of showcase some of the signs, maybe explain to you a little bit more what undue familiarity is. And this is just all in an effort to make sure we're aware of, what could happen in our environment, not just the games that inmates can play, but what about if we have someone, one of our staff members that's being caught up? What are some of the things that you may need to see, how you should react to it? And on another level, what are the consequences if you get caught up? This is no joke. Undue familiarity can definitely truly take you down the path to being corrupted. My guest today is going to be Russ Hamilton. But before we start the show on undue familiarity, let me just say what we got on the market. I have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. This book's available on Amazon. It's used in training all across the country. Guys, if you haven't gotten this book, I would recommend you get this book. And again, the link to this book is in the description. I also have two other books published by Blue 360 Media. We have Tips for New Correctional Officers and Their Supervisors and Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison. These books just have tons of tips and advice for those working in corrections, not just for myself, but from others in the field. So if you guys get a chance, check out the link to that in the description. And I have three other books coming out in the market as well. The other three are going to be published by Blue 360 Media. We're going to have a book on dealing with unruly inmates. I don't have the exact title on that yet. I got another book very similar to the styles of How to Succeed in Corrections. And that's going to be about leadership. And then we have one other book. This is the bigger book. This book's going to be about $80, and it's about report writing. And it's, after writing this book, the process of report writing is a lot more complex than people may think. So I try to provide a book that's all exhaustive for those that are working in corrections, but it's not just a introduction, even though it is a book that can help people be introduced to report writing. But there's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't even know, and I've been writing reports for 22 years. So it's just a book that's all encompassing, and I'm just very proud of it. And these books should be out very soon. And again, that book on report writing is a bit expensive. It's about $80. But once you get your hands on it, you'll see why. It's pretty much a textbook that I don't think a book like that has been written before for corrections, or at least not written in this type of detailed manner. All right, let me get Russ. What's up, Russ?
Hey there, Anthony. How's it going, sir?
Good. What's going on? Oh, wait, what? Where are you? Oh, there he is.
I'm having technical issues already. No, it's just...
And when you say technical issue, it just means that your phone fell off the little stand, correct?
Well, yeah. To me, that's a technical issue.
No, it is.
The rest of everything that goes on inside that little black box is magic to me.
Oh, I actually have a technical issue right now. I forgot to put one of my lights on. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
So we both have technical issues. There we go. Not that it does much, but it gives me a little.
All right.
Something. Yeah, remind me of the days my wife put me in the dungeon. Hey, Russ, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, going all the way back into the 80s at San Quentin. I'm also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I am currently working for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work. And that's for a local probation department and a local county jail where I am the case manager.
And housekeepers.
So Keepers of Chaos, I'm the founder of that, and it is on Facebook. And basically, if you work in any part of corrections, be it medical, education, whatever, come on over. We'd love to have you. Keepers of Chaos is all about serving your needs, giving you great training, great insight, great history, and everything else that goes along with that.
All right, now, Russ, this is definitely a good topic. I mean, I love discussing topics that lean towards more of inmate interactions, managing inmate behavior, or definitely love touching on topics on inmate manipulation. I know a lot of people tend to really focus on corruption. I mean, even when it's taught in the academy, everybody seems to focus on the end result. I think what we should also really focus on and this is where probably the preventive measures could take place, is the building of that undue familiarity, the building of that relationship that begins to cross the line between the staff member and the inmate. That's the process. I think for us, that's what we really want to focus on, because that's when we can kind of hopefully either detect and prevent from it getting further than, again, by the time it gets to the corruption part, it's to me, it's already too late. I think when you get to when you start to look at behavior and starting to shift, and you see that there's a relationship being built between a staff member and an inmate, that's when we tend to have to be the most involved in doing what we can to correct what we see, which, if it's talking to the officer or just making sure that, this behavior is something that we do not tolerate. But I want to mention something here before we go into the dialogue. The funny thing about unethical behavior or undue familiarity is that we may notice something's not right. We may notice that this person's too close to the inmate, but then instead of us kind of talking to that staff member, we wind up avoiding the staff member. And then at the end result is we kind of let the staff member, feed them to the wolves, while the inmate continues to play their game without no counter influence. And by the way, undue familiarity is a willing partnership between the victim and the aggressor. But with that said, sometimes there are people that don't know they're going down that road. And then once you decide as a peer that, this guy's too close to the inmates, I'm just going to go ahead and, let them figure out the hard way. Yeah, well, now you just actually helped out the inmate, and you're actually making the facility a little bit more vulnerable. What's your thoughts, right? Russ, would you agree the undue familiarity is the process before the corruption?
I would say that sometimes it's the process. Inmates are just as complex as any other human being, and there may be things that they may realize that they will not get from that process, depending on the type of person that's there. I think always, certainly, it's in the back of their mind that they're going to be able to go all the way with this individual. But, I've said it very many times, is that if we think about undue familiarity as always leading to something else, we're going to cut ourselves short. And we're going to be able for people to say, well, I would never do anything corrupt. I would never be, turned by an inmate. And that's not always the point. The point of the matter is that you can be put into a position where you feel an obligation to do favors, however minor, favors that are, perhaps even perfectly legal, but you may not see the full effect of the favors that you're giving out that might, impinge very negatively on security. You might be roped into doing all kinds of different things, and then you become, whether you like the term or not, that hug-a-thug mentality, where you are turned into the type of person who is more likely to take the side of an inmate simply because of the status of that inmate, the label and the position that they're put in. And we have to be very, very careful about that. There's some people that are much more likely to feel at home and feel comfortable with inmates, and that's not what we want. But we also have to understand, there's a lot of facilities out there where the difference between, I'm not saying that the difference between staff and inmates is not stark, because it is, and it always should be. But inmates, many of those inmates, can be family members and everything else of some of the people that are running that, or longtime school friends. And they just have a lot more interaction before any of the, the criminal injustice, let me catch it, before any of the criminal justice issues got caught up in there. And so, in the areas that I started out in state prisons and stuff, there was never any question, at least with most of the people surrounding me, is we kept ourselves separated from the inmate population. It was very much more professional, but there were breakdowns by some people who did feel more comfortable in those situations. and would spend hours talking to inmates. They would go out of their way to find specific inmates, and that's where it becomes problematic. That's where it can go all the way to corruption. But you should never just think about it as always leading to corruption, because then you'll come up short. Because then you will, if you're on the lookout for it between specific individuals, you will think that it's okay as long as it comes up short. Then guess who is involved in undue familiarity? Not with the inmate, but with the person that's potentially co-opted or corrupted.
Yeah, see, I always look at it as the potential can go that way, which motivates us to act. Because I didn't put it down as it being, well, it may not always lead in that way, but I do like to put the extreme on there, because at any point it could go into that way. So I'm hoping that people also find motivation in knowing that it could be a process that could go that route. And like you said, I think people need to realize something too. The undue familiarity really deals with the removing you out of the prescribed role. So the professional relationship of officer to inmate or staff member to inmate starts to translate into a more personal relationship, however that is defined. Friendship. If you guys know each other for a family, it's at any point where you feel that relationship supersedes your professional role.
And this is one reason why I believe that labels are so important.
Yes,
I operate under the assumption that I am Officer Hamilton, I am Sergeant Hamilton, or I am Senior Juvenile Correctional Officer Hamilton, and that is Inmate Smith, or that is Youth Jones, or whatever it is. And there's a lot of attempts to remove those labels from both sides, because they think that it stigmatizes people, and it doesn't. My feeling is that inmates don't feel stigmatized anyway. This is something that they've grown up with; they're used to it. But instead of calling them inmates, now we have to call them residents, or we have to call them people in our custody, PIOCs, or any number of things, from people who are oriented towards that. And I know people aren't going to like me saying this, towards that do-gooder mentality that actually does no good.
Yeah, because the label, and we've done it even in my books before, the label is a defense mechanism for us. It keeps us within the prescribed role. And Russ, within what you said, so I love what you said before. Again, just going back into that the undue familiarity part. So would you agree with this, though, to kind of make sure we're both on the same page? Undue familiarity to me would be maybe more so where at any point, and I think this may encompass what you said, at any point, the personal relationship, however it's been developed, because undue familiarity definitely has some level of development outside of your prescribed role. So I would say it's the personal relationship automatically superseding the professional role.
Yes, absolutely, and that's where the barriers, the containment fields that we have within our profession start to break down. We start to have this bleed over from one section of our life into another section of our life, where we're spending extra time, which is something you wouldn't do necessarily with every inmate there, but now you've picked an inmate that for whatever reason you have some type of connection with, and that starts to erode those particular barriers, those borders that we're supposed to keep in place to keep everybody safer. Once again, it doesn't necessarily go all the way, but you start showing favors. Hey, maybe that inmate gets in trouble, and you go to bat for them, and you make sure that, hey, it's written up as something lower than it is, or you make sure that, hey, you know what, that piece of paperwork never makes it to his file, or something that you feel as being de minimis in nature, but is really a huge flare. It's a huge caution flag. And, laundry on the field, throwing the flag and saying, hey, wait a second, you just crossed over into an area where now it's even more problematic than it was before.
Yeah, and Russ, I want to mention, I want to make sure people know we're kind of using undue familiarity and equating it to unethical behavior, and the reason why is obviously it's a lesser form than the outright outcome of a corrupt act. Unethical behavior, which is about actions that violate moral principles or professional standards, but do not necessarily break the law. So, I mean, these are things that I remember in the academy, someone would say, you know, when you run a housing unit, run it as if your supervisor's watching you or as if your family members are watching you. And I was like, well, that is so weak because that means I'm only doing the right thing when people are watching me. I don't think there's integrity in that. I think integrity is about doing the right thing when no one's watching. So I think that old lesson of, pretend that your family members watching you run this unit or pretend that a supervisor is watching you really doesn't motivate you in the right direction. It actually makes you look both ways before you cross the street type thing. No, it's about knowing what is right, knowing what is wrong. And basically how I figured that out is basically I know what the agency expects from me. I know what my peers expect from me. And that is my filter of judgment when it comes to making sure that my decisions are ethical. But undue familiarity, why I think it's so important, Russ, and I definitely want to get your thoughts on this, is undue familiarity may not be something that's so overt. It may be very slow and subtle, which makes a lot of us hesitant to address it if we believe that someone is falling prey to it. So let's just say Russ is, it looks like he's getting overly involved with an inmate. I may not be able to explain, why I feel that way, but I just do. But because there may not be a lot of evidence on it, I don't act immediately. I just kind of, let it play out. And then at any point where it's like, you know what, I just feel uncomfortable because one, what if I'm wrong? And he gets mad at me for, pretty much saying he's too close to the inmate. Or what I'll do is, you know what, I'm not even going to bother with this individual because they are too close. I just don't have the courage to confront them on it. So then what happens is I walk away from it. A couple of months later, Russ winds up in handcuffs. And here we are saying, well, I knew that was going to happen. Like, where was the preventive measure the whole time if you knew that was going to happen? Would you agree, Russ?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those things, that really separates the wheat from the chaff. There's times where your professional duty is going to be uncomfortable to you in ways that I've often had it be uncomfortable to me, or that I've seen people who were so uncomfortable with their part of it, they handed it off to me instead. And so you just have to be willing to do whatever it takes and take the preventative measures, no matter what the cost is at the moment. Nobody wants to go in there and look like a snitch or this, that, or the other thing. But I've seen it. If I just may for a second, I've had conversations with officers who would say things to me like this when I was doing a lesson on undue familiarity and or corruption, and we tend to be talking about the corruption part. And the first thing they'd say to me is I don't even need this lesson because I would never do anything corrupt. Yeah, but would you be unduly familiar with an inmate and not realize that you're being manipulated into doing something? And then at some further point down the road where they could blackmail you with something, whether it's true or not, because of the thing that you've done, you could still end up in a huge jackpot, losing your job, even if you'd done nothing, against the law up to that point. You just only struck on the undue familiarity part. So it's not an easy thing, and I'll never forget one situation because, young staff, being young staff, they are even less comfortable, with coming forward on things. But these young staff members, they did, and they had witnessed what they thought was undue familiarity. between what we would call a free cook, which meant someone who just works there as a cook, and an inmate cook that was on their crew. And they didn't know how to go about reporting it. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to identify what they were seeing. And so they were kind of put in a little bit of a pickle. They didn't know exactly how to react. And so it was actually a really good teaching moment, where I took it and said, okay, so you're telling me all of these things, and I understand that. I said, so I'm going to show you what we're going to do. And I'm going to say, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to contact the investigative services unit. And then as soon as I'm done contacting them, to make sure I'm not getting in the way of something that they're doing, I'm going to have some people go hit this guy's locker. And sure enough, as soon as I did that, we came up with marijuana, we came up with love letters, we came up with some other substances and things like that. And it was a moment for those young skulls full of mush to understand how serious it was that we were doing, because sometimes when you're just engaged in things day to day and you have that close proximity to certain specific inmates, in this case, it was about 30 or 40 of them, you tend to lose that edge. And that was kind of a wake up call for them, to be able to see that, hey, this is real. This can happen. This can happen, to someone that's, right next to me. And so you just have to be wary and cautious and know the right things to go through and how to trigger the things that you need to trigger. And every place is going to be different. But I just started with what I knew, and I contacted, my people in the investigations unit, and I made sure that I was out of their way and free to do what I needed to do. And then as soon as I came up and we had the love letters and we had the dope and everything else, then we just went ahead and processed all the evidence, and then investigations was able to step in and finish the rest of the investigation, which at that point then involved several outside agencies because of the scope of what was being brought in. I hope I didn't go on too long there.
No, because within context, what you're saying, actually, there's a lot of things that make sense there. Like for the investigative agency, sometimes people wonder, why do they let a relationship with a staff member and an inmate go on so long before they finally do something? It's because the unethical behavior may not be criminal, and the investigative division has to wait for something criminal, probably, for it to be acted on, where the facility itself wants the preventive measure. I don't want to wait for something to be criminal. So
exactly.
So usually the balance is going to be some security measured, not so overt, but enough to kind of monitor the behavior so it doesn't get to that point. But you're still able to see the potential for the criminal act to occur, like maybe an exchange or something that shouldn't happen. So it's the investigative division is chasing for the criminal action we want to prevent. We don't want to get to that point, but in order to solidify this, you got to have something that starts to lean towards that criminal action.
And that's the problem with the hammer and nail analogy, though, is if you think that every real problem can only look like a nail, then the only solution that you're ever going to come up with is a hammer. And so that's why I would caution, the guys in your investigative units and stuff. You know what? I would rather get to something too early and have to produce some really good paperwork and work to get someone fired than I would to have them, accidentally the first time they bring something in, it be not some, dope or a cell phone, but it be, a gun or something where an escape attempt happened or somebody got hurt or killed. I think that we need to be, more on the preemptive and preventative side rather than thinking, well, I got to find a way to make this stick in case it goes to court.
Well, right. So I think so. I also think there's a preventive measure in that too, but I get what you're saying, Russ. Like, I think that there is, when it comes to undue familiarity, at least that's the scope of the dialogue today, is that, it's gonna, if it leads towards something criminal, the investigative division needs that for the accountability side. We want the preventive measure. So we don't want it to get to that point. So having said that, a good working relationship between, let's say, the administrative team and the investigative division can allow for that balance where we have preventive measures in place so we don't allow for something to get too far, but we also get to the point where the person can't deny the motive. I think that's the concern too with undue familiarity. Like, you want to go after someone, let's say, because they're showing favoritism to an inmate. Well, the investigative division is going to want to kind of say, well, where's the criminal in that? Where we know, well, wait a second, guys, that's where manipulation starts. Undue familiarity could be the heart of vulnerability and making people more susceptible to manipulation. So the end result is, I don't want it to get there. So having said that, can we do something now? And the investigative division is like, yeah, but I can't just go on what you think is a motive. I need to put something in place where the motive of that individual can't be denied. So we need to get to a point where there's evidence, where there's something that I can showcase that the person can't deny their intent or their motive. And I think that's why, guys, if you have a undue relationship going on in the facility, that's why before anybody acts on making an effort to separate, so many parties are going to be involved in that decision, including the investigative division being number one, because the last thing you want to do is separate and violate a due process of an investigation in which they're close to connecting what they need to hold that person accountable. So, Russ, there is a balance here, Russ. I mean, you got to balance the overall.
I think there is, but I've just seen I've seen a lot of people let their egos override what's best.
But I don't want to, right. So I don't want to go on that extreme what if. I don't want to stereotype, because that's no different than saying we're going to stereotype everybody towards the worst. I want to just mention that there is that level of accountability that allows for it to be preventive, because at the end of the day, it does showcase that, hey, we don't tolerate this, and hopefully other people start to step up and realize, like, yo, we're on point. But sometimes the conflict here is basically, we want that preventive measure, they want that that criminal charge. Either way, I don't think we're that far in what we ultimately want for the facility. We want a safer facility. So having said that, there's usually that balance of, well, how do we meet both? How do we make sure that now that we know that there's a concern or there's something starting to happen between, let's say, Russ and this inmate, how do I balance or create some level of safety while we allow this relationship to pursue to that criminal act? Right? Would you agree?
Yes. I just want people to be, huh?
No, go ahead again. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I just want people to be aware that the last thing that we want to do is put people in jeopardy, because I've seen that happen firsthand in an incident that we were involved in, that involved an armed correctional officer whose house was served a warrant while he was up in the tower. And the people that served that warrant was the local county, and they didn't bother to tell us. And they knew that he was assigned to that tower, and they knew that he had a gun. And we were just very lucky that it all worked out the right way.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that could be just a failure to communicate. I actually, in my report writing book, I actually have something similar to this. Actually, I'm thinking about it. I actually discussed something where when you guys, a little sidebar here, when an incident report usually has what they call follow-ups. An investigative report has what they call recommendations. Follow-ups are usually immediate, maybe done by a supervisor, just to, if you have a riot in yard, let me follow up to make sure tensions, whatever, something immediate. Recommendations are more long-term, which could also include punitive action. And sometimes what happens is, if, let's say, the supervisor needs to do an immediate follow-up, but that immediate follow-up could jeopardize maybe an investigative concern that they're trying to address. Well, now we have to figure out and work together. What can we do that balances things out? How do I maintain safety without violating the due process of an investigation? And guys, these are decisions that a decision like this is really made almost every day at the facility. If there's an investigation that can lead to a criminal matter, but we have an effort to want to keep a safe facility, we have to ask ourselves, okay, so how far do we want this to go? And how do we mitigate it in the meantime to make sure that this is carefully monitored? Because there's even a risk from the investigative division, Russ, too. And I want to mention that, because if I'm the investigative division, and again, going back to the undue familiarity or the developed relationship between, let's say, staff, an unprofessional relationship between staff and inmate, the investigative division takes a huge risk in trying to chase after that criminal element, because they know that there's a chance that during this process, they could lose sight of what that corrupted act could be. So let's say, like you said, Russ, it could be bringing, let's say, something into the facility. So if I'm the investigative division and I decide, hey, listen, Russ, here's what I want to do. And let's say you're admin. I know I can get this guy. I know this person's bringing something in. So it's getting to that point where it's crossing into corruption. If I can make sure that, when he's getting ready to bring it in, let's say we're all within the lobby. So the moment he gets through the metal detector, because that's the intent. You got to get that person through the metal detector, because that's when they cross the line into the controlled compound. Then we're there immediately to make the rest. Right or wrong. If we go there and he doesn't have anything, holy shit, we messed up, but at least we're not allowing them into the facility. So it's a huge risk when that decision is made to balance safety and security with that need to catch that criminal act for accountability. And when administration finally agrees on, okay, we're going to let this relationship play out, but you better make sure, because this is for the safety of staff, because I do want this guy out or this woman out, and I want to make sure that they can never get their job again. Because that's another thing. I need evidence to get that. So I get why we want to do it, because I want to make sure that, this person can never find a job in law enforcement again, and maybe, get arrested for what they're doing. But you got to make sure that you make a promise here that we don't jeopardize any safety and security in the effort to get this person to follow through with whatever this exchange is, or the potential. And again, guys, it's extremely tough, because even when it comes to undue relationships, you need something to validate the motive or the intent. So you could see things all day, but if there's no evidence, that person could change their story. If someone goes to bring in drugs into the facility, how do you prove that those drugs are for the inmate population? Regardless, they're wrong anyway, but I want to get that distribution charge. I want to get a couple of things in there. But right now I got a guy that comes in with marijuana that says, oh shit, I didn't mean to bring that in. I meant to give that to my father. I must have left it in my jacket last night. So you got to prove that you can debunk whatever excuse that they're going to have. Now, and that's not easy. So guys, so again, let's go back to the undue. That was a good little sidebar. We could do a whole dialogue on that. The undue familiarity, as I mentioned, is more of the inappropriate, overly personal relationship between staff and inmates that can compromise security and professional boundaries. The perception is often seen as a form of unethical behavior rather than outright corruption, as it involves crossing professional boundaries without necessarily involving criminal activity. Now, one of the things me and Russ said before is that it's subtle and it's common. Now, Russ, I got to mention this, Russ. The reason why I think it's good to have a dialogue on undue familiarity is because in corrections now, our interactions with the inmates are not just routine, but more frequent. So it leaves us vulnerable, correct, to develop relationships with the inmate population that could go beyond the personal, could go beyond the professional.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you look at the type of law enforcement and policing that we do, we are in a very, how would you put this? We are in where there's a huge density towards the people that we're policing. It's the same people each and every day. Your average street level cop, he has interactions probably on the most part with different people every day. Does he have some frequent flyers? Yeah, certainly. Every place does. But in our situation, everyone is a frequent flyer, just about. Of course, some are going to get into more scrapes and problems than others, but we see them day in and day out. And familiarity can breed a sort of contempt. And I don't mean that in the sense that you hate the person. I mean that in the sense that you stop viewing them as a security threat. Maybe you stop viewing them as any type of threat. And I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm just saying that it's easy for you to start viewing them, more as a human being than an inmate. And boy, I know people aren't going to like me saying that, but whatever. But the thing is that that's when those walls between the professional and the personal start to erode a little bit, and we can act in a manner that we would not be acting if that barrier was still there, that professional barrier. And now our actions and our behavior and the way we've treated that particular individual has changed from the way it should be to something that it should not be. And that doesn't mean that it's all the way over on the corrupt side, but it means that we're starting to veer in that direction.
Yeah, and guys, what Russ is saying is great, because what we kind of mentioned when it comes to the undue familiarity is it makes you vulnerable to the risk of manipulation. So it's inmates may exploit these relationships for favors or leniency, compromising the staff members' objectivity and the institution's security. And there's a power dynamic here. Inmates might use the undue familiarity to manipulate staff into overlooking rule violations, providing contraband. I mean, one of the things I've noticed here is when you start developing that personal relationship outside the prescribed role, a good game that inmates play in regards to this undue familiarity aspect is guilt. It's a little subtle, but they play the guilt trap. You know what I mean? Like if I'm sitting here trying to hold the inmate accountable, and the inmate's able to say, well, hey, if you write me up for this, I can see my children, and you're a father. We talked about, fatherhood, and, you were sharing stories about you being a father, and how would you feel if you couldn't see your kids? And they start to use that relationship in so many different ways. As I said, one is guilt. One is, Russ said before, obligation. We're developing a relationship, and maybe, you're a good porter, you clean well, and I make it known how good you are. I make it known, I put you at the top of the pedestal, and we develop a bond because of your work ethic. And next thing you know, the inmate has got a sense that, okay, well, you know what, I got them. They're obligated to me now. And when you go to, let's say you have to hold the inmate accountable, the inmate will make it look like that all the work they've ever done for you was a favor, that they don't do that for everyone else, that they only did it for you, and this is how you're going to treat them. And again, it's like they exploit that relationship through so many different feelings. I think guilt is one, obligation. What other ones you think, Russ? Any other ones?
I mean, there could be a lot of potential different feelings. I just always broke it down, or a lot of times when I talk about it, is to sex, feelings, money, obligation, and extortion. Right. And because, feelings, there's so many different ones. It could be guilt. It could be love. It could be whatever. And then you've got the sex, the obligation, like you just said, or what I call the quid pro quo. And then there's extortion. And, if you have a sophisticated ring of inmates that have specifically targeted you, they will use any and all of those until they get what they want. And when you get to that extortion part of it, they got no qualms about, physically hurting you over it, or physically hurting someone in your family, or exposing you for what you've done.
Yeah, and guys,
I should add threats to that, even though threats and extortion kind of go together.
Yeah, but I think that once they do the threat or the extortion, the relationship is gone. I think the other lesser forms, like guilt or some level of obligation, is the softer form to keep the relationship. Once they feel that the relationship can't be exploited, then it's the leverage that turns into a threat or extortion. So like if I was an inmate, I may try guilt because here we are, we've kind of crossed that professional line, and then maybe you have a wake-up call and like, no, hold on, you did that, you're not making me feel guilty, you're getting charged. Now I'm going to say, well, this relationship thing, this game we're playing is not working. So now what have you done for me so far? A, B, C, D. Well, Russ, I'm going to tell you something. If you don't go ahead and, do this for me, then I'm going to report A, B, C, and D. So once the inmate crosses to that threat or to that extortion, that destroys the relationship. And they know that. That's why I think it's a last resort. I think they play the other avenues out first so they can nurture the relationship into something more long-term. But then once you go through that wake-up call and you start to realize, like, holy shit, this guy's been playing me the whole time, and the inmate now knows, okay, you know what, I lost this relationship. Now I'm going to go for the more aggressive routes because the relationship already gives me what I need now, which gives me the leverage to start pushing into the threat or the extortion. Does that make sense or no?
Yeah, that's different ones will handle different things like that, but they do tend to want to try and put the squeeze on for as long as possible. But a lot of times they get greedy though, and they'll slip up. Maybe they'll do something a little bit early, or some of these real high level predators and stuff. They actually enjoy the part about hurting, threatening, etc., more than they do about the softer part of the game. So it just all depends. But just know that if you're up against a few different guys that have done this kind of thing before, you're in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I agree, Russ. And Russ, I think once the inmate, like as we mentioned, once the inmate crosses that threat, that extortion, the inmate knows at that point it's also all out. There's no turning back now. Right. And I think actually when the inmate does that, the right thing to do at that point, if you're staff and, it's like, holy shit, this is a wake-up call for me. For me, if we all could get tricked, but what you do now at this point matters to me. Like, I get that we could get tricked, but once it's been exposed that this inmate has been playing you and you decide now to CYA, I don't forgive you anymore. You don't have respect for me anymore because now you know. I'll give you ignorance maybe, but now you know. And at this point, you're letting the leverage, control your actions. I've seen officers that have gotten caught up, and the moment the inmate, tries for something that's totally crazy, and the staff member realized holy shit, that's what this has been about the whole time. And the inmate says, well, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I'm going to do A, B, C, D. The staff member reports themselves immediately because they take onus of their own actions and they don't want someone else to fall victim to their own actions. So at that point, I give that person respect. They made foolish choices, but once they realized that there was a line that was crossed, they corrected themselves, as opposed to other people who, once they get the leverage, they go into selfish mode. And I don't really give a shit about my partners. I just don't want to get in trouble now. Yeah, but you're already downhill. You're going to get caught up eventually. You might as well, have the integrity that you left and just face the music, as opposed to waiting for it to pop up because you've lost control. You're not in control. And Russ, that's another thing about the undue relationship aspect, because there is a power dynamic here, right? I think when it becomes undue, the power does shift from the staff member to the inmate. So that's always going to be a concern, because I think that when it starts to shift from the professional to the personal, the power goes into the inmate's hands 100%. You keep it professional, it stays in your hands. If it shifts to the personal, because now the prescribed role is no longer in existence, it's more of how we connect on the human level, in agreement with what Russ said. The power dynamic shifts now to the inmate. That's why I was okay with Russ saying the human side, because that human side could make us vulnerable. Correct, Russ? Because that's where the power shifts.
Yeah, absolutely. But you have to understand that. I would just say this. You just really have to be cognizant of what it is where you are and what you're doing at every single moment inside here. And anytime that you let your defenses down, you should just be expecting, that big right hand. The instant this comes down, you should know that you're going to get hit, that something's going to be done. And so don't do those things. Don't let yourself become vulnerable. Always play the professional card, and never do the things that are against policy and procedure if you can at all help it.
Yeah, and guys, I want to two more things. One thing is I want to talk about detecting it, and then I want to go off and defending it so we can have a complete round dialogue. So first, for the detection, undue familiarity may be hard to detect at first. I mean, because having said that, I don't know, given an inmate favoritism the first time around, maybe it may not be seen as many as the beginning of a corrupt road, but it's the frequency. And then also, it's not just that, but I think it's the comparison of how you treat that inmate to other inmates. I think that's another thing too. Sometimes the extreme, and I want to be a hard ass to these 20, but this one right here, I treat them a little different. Well, that easily stands out. So for me, I would like to say, if you are a professional, you're going to recognize first before anybody else will recognize that something doesn't feel, if you have experience, something doesn't feel right, but you wind up finding ways to justify what it is that you're doing, which starts to push those feelings down. You're not doing something correct, but either way, you start to justify what you're doing. So therefore, that conflict, it's there, but it lessens. And then you wind up actually start believing in that justification, which means that maybe you're different, or maybe that inmate's different, whatever it is that makes you more unique. Like if Russ was doing what you were doing right now, you'd be all over Russ. But having said that, this is me. I'm not Russ. I know me. And it's okay if I can do it. So sometimes I feel it's funny how we wind up judging someone else for doing something foolish, putting that label on them. And then here I am doing the same thing, but because I think I know me better, it's okay for me. And it's very hypocritical, but that's the first thing. And another thing is, for us as the observer, there should be some shift in behavior. And what I mean by that is there should be some level of behavior that you can note and say, wow, that person's always working overtime in this one unit, or that person goes out of their way to see this one inmate, and sometimes it's not even just about the inmate. Could it be the location? Could it be just the extra time they spend in the unit in general? Because I've seen staff who have undue relationships with inmates that developed into something. And it was like, wow, man, it's like, well, how long did they spend time with that inmate in order for that relationship to develop? In some cases, it was no longer than 2 or 3 minutes a day. It was that brief of an interaction, but the interaction was intentional. It's a different type of interaction. If I bump into Russ and it's not an intentional interaction, it's just I bump into Russ, we may shoot the shit, but then I'm on my way. I didn't want to go see Russ. It just happens to be Russ is there. We interact briefly. I go on and do my thing. Russ goes on and do his thing, and we're, whatever. We're doing separate ththings. But if my intent is to look forward to that 2 or 3 minutes with Russ, and Russ's intent is to play me, that 2 or 3 minutes has a stronger dynamic to it. Would you agree with that, Russ? Because we're also aware of the confines of what's allowed, and an intentional 2 to 3 minute meet and greet could carry a lot of weight in a prison setting.
Especially when, and I've seen people get involved in this where they're purposefully flirting with disaster. They want to see how close they can get to the edge. Which is really bad because that's a brand new type of complacency, because they're thinking that they can pull back. They're thinking that maybe they have control of the situation, and what they're not counting on is number one, obviously the inmate that they're doing this with, but secondly, other inmates are as much or more aware than I am at seeing what's going on. And if you think those inmates aren't willing to use pressure and manipulation based on what they see, you have no idea what an inmate's about. I've seen it. Inmates will step forward into a situation that they can, get some leverage, and they will automatically, well, hey, you know what? You better start bringing stuff in. Hey, you know what? You better start putting money on my books, and they'll run it for everything it's worth. Why should they not? They're in a no-win situation. Some of these guys are doing life. Why would they not capitalize and leverage your stupidity against you?
Yeah, and you know what's funny? That you say that nothing's 100%, but I wrote it in my last book, Inmate Manipulation Decoded. The interaction for that undue, I think for the males, but nothing's 100%, is more about control. So sometimes that 3 minute, I'm just whatever it is, the intentional effort to meet is more to just kind of maintain control. Where for the female, or again, nothing 100%, but just in this case, gender, however we want to word it, it's more of a confirmation of feeling, because the females may be willing to give up the control in a return for some confirmation of love or whatever it is, some declaration of, I don't know, some feeling. I don't know, but just more towards the feeling aspect, where the interaction with the male could be some more of level of control. But I think, as I mentioned before, and I don't think I mentioned this part in any of my books, is the intentional effort matters. Because I think when people say, well, how long are your interactions with these inmates anyway? How long are these interactions on supervisors? Like, what? I don't know if any of that all matters. I really don't. I grant that it could add to it, but it doesn't mean you got to have, hour-long dialogues with someone day after day to cross this line. I think it's more when the parties both have intentional effort. The inmate could be the intentional effort to set the staff up or get what they want to make life a little bit easier. And for the officer, it's whatever it is that they're trying to gain. If it's a feeling of a connection or something sexual or whatever it is, it's an intentional effort. So for me, one of the things that I look at if I'm dealing with someone who could be on their way to being compromised, so they're developing an undue relationship, is the intentionality to meet with that inmate. I don't care for how long. I want to know why. Like, why are you with that inmate every day? Like what's going on here? Explain to me why. I want to know why. I want you to tell me why right now is your unit here and you're over here. Why? I think that's extremely important. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah, that's almost always one of the tells. I'll never forget. One time we walked a guy up, and instantly the one officer, she started coming in to add seg, and just standing there in front of his cell, talking to him for, 15, 20, 30 minutes at a time. And, everyone was kind of like, pointing, but we all also kind of knew that, this guy was, up. And by up, I think people know what I mean by that. I hope they do. And that, this situation was being monitored. He only had like a week to go to his probation, not probation, his parole. And sure enough, the person who picked him up at the station, it was her. And that kind of goes back to what we were discussing, back toward the beginning, towards, making the case versus rectifying the threat. And so anyway, needless to say, she lost her job over that. And that was one of the reasons why nobody was saying very much about, what she was doing there inside that particular building. So, but that's always the one, though, that gives them away, is the amount of time that they're spending away from an area that they should be at in an area that they aren't assigned to. And so that's a huge, huge red flag.
Yeah. And guys, I think in defense of it all, like as I mentioned, I mean, these are the behaviors that are very subtle. So it definitely takes courage for an observer to not have the exact evidence, but to say, you know what, just doesn't feel right. Let me trust in myself and go talk to this individual, because maybe they are being played. Maybe it's not so obvious for them, even though I do firmly believe that even though we play a part, I think the person that knows they're being played first is the person that's being played. Because the only reason why I'm saying that is because sometimes there's conflict and they push it down. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you notice some of these people that say they didn't know they were being played, yeah, you may not, but you sure had a lot of secretive dialogue. And the moment a supervisor came in, another staff member came in, you quickly tell the inmate, hey, go back to your room or go back to your whatever, get away from the podium. So at that point here, you know something's up because you're actually telling the inmate to step away when, you know, other people are coming in. Well, I didn't know the inmate was playing me. Well, then why would you tell every time someone came in, why would you always tell the inmate to step away? Now, granted, I may not be able to witness that because by the time I get in, you've already told the inmate to step away. But the moment you're telling the inmate to do that before anybody comes in, or you know someone's coming in and you tell you step away, well, then you know you're doing something wrong. And maybe it's not so surface, but it doesn't feel right. That's the key. It doesn't feel right. See, for you, for the person going through it, it's a feeling. Now, for us, yes, we have to recognize a feeling, but we're more than we want to see something. So technically, it's harder for us to go on the feeling, you know, because I don't have enough evidence. But with that said, for the person that's being played, you really got to look inwards and say, hey, if this doesn't feel right, step back and really reevaluate from an outside perspective. What the hell are you doing? You know, I mean, it's something as simple as the inmates, instead of in front of you at the podium, they're off to the side, or they those intentional interactions. Or listen, here's one thing right now that I think is a direct giveaway, but it's not something we as observers will know. It's something more of the person going through it. But the moment, two things: the moment you think about an inmate at home, and the moment you look forward to seeing that inmate when you get to work, you're already caught up. I'm sorry, for whatever reason, you're already caught up. Would you
Yeah,
agree
and
with that?
emphasis on the whatever reason. It does, you know, even though, you know, we sometimes highlight because it's easier the whole, you know, potentially romantic sexual aspect. It doesn't have to be any of those. It can just be the fact that you're co-opted and corrupted through something as simple as, you know, a friendship. The other ones I think are definitely more problematic, but that doesn't mean that you're not being put in a position of disadvantage and ready to lose your career over some stupid shit.
Yeah, Russ, and that really is spot on. And I think, again, as we wrap up the dialogue, you know, this to me is definitely an important topic because it's it's a process. It really is a process that requires us to get involved before it falls too deep. But again, it really, it's about you checking yourself, but also, you know, you have a support system. I mean, I would like to think we're supportive enough and trustful enough to know that if Russ came up to me and said, hey, Ganj, you know, be honest with you, I'm not saying do anything wrong, but it doesn't look right between you and this one inmate. I don't get mad at Russ for trying to watch my back. I'm not so you know, invested in what I'm doing with this inmate that, you know, I'm going to jeopardize my friendship with Russ, who's had my back since day one. Russ, thank you, man. Here, I wasn't catching myself. You caught me slipping, and that won't happen again. I mean, and another thing about the undue relationships, a lot of times these undue relationships form because people are afraid of conflict. And it's true. An inmate starts asking you a personal question and you just answer it because you don't want to feel like you're being rude and telling the inmate it's none of their business. And that kind of opens up the door for the officers that don't mind conflict. You know, they don't have the concern of maybe developing, you know, because they're quick to say, yeah, that's none of your business. They'll be cordial the whole time. But the moment the inmate goes, hey, what are you doing for Christmas? Are you off this week? You're spending time with the family? And the officer will go 180. That's none of your business. You know, it's not work related. What do you care what I'm doing on when I'm not here? Because I sure as hell may not care what you're doing when I'm not here. You know what I mean? So, hey, Rush, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, people, this is a really, really serious part of the job, is making sure, number one, that you don't fall for bullshit, and number two, that you're able to recognize it and be able to report it up the chain, should it occur in your area. And if you're in this game long enough, you are going to come across this. I'm sure that it happens less at maybe smaller facilities, county lockups, and things like that, but it still will happen. When you're part of a bigger agency, like I was, where you have 45,000 peace officers, you're apt to come across it more. But it's one of those things that we really have to root out and stamp out because the stakes are so high. We never know when one of these particular incidents is going to lead to something horrible. Long before I got to San Quentin, there was an incident, and this was actually carried on America's Most Wanted and another TV program. I can't remember which one it was, but ostensibly what happened is this teacher fell in love with an inmate who had killed a young boy at a ballpark down in Modesto, California. Had shot him. Back then, ARs were kind of rare, but he had an AR and shot the kid and killed him. I believe that the kid was actually the son of a Modesto detective, if I recall correctly. But anyway, he ended up getting life without at San Quentin. She fell in love with him, brought in maybe an ID. It was never really truly revealed, and ended up helping him escape. And 11 years went by, and they did the program, America's Most Wanted, John Walsh, and sure enough, somebody dimed him out. And the SSU unit and the U.S. Marshals and the FBI went down there and found him in Puerto Rico, brought him back. And anyway, while he was out there on the yard one day, he started a fight and ended up catching a bullet to the back of the head. And there's more to that story, but maybe I'll save that for another day. But just know that this stuff is deadly serious. Lives are on the line, and don't let it happen to you. And if you do not have the type of mentality it takes to operate in that type of environment without becoming, unduly familiar with an inmate, or even if you're just maybe excessively friendly, then don't opt in. Don't play the game. There's no shame in that. The shame is to, dishonor yourself, dishonor your department, dishonor your badge if you have a badge. So don't get caught up in that.
Yeah, and guys, when it comes to undue familiarity, it's creating such a trust with the inmate that you basically hand over the potential consequences, because at the end of the day, you're not worried about the inmate, very externally driven, but you're not worried about the inmate reporting you. It's funny because we go in there with the right motive. We do the right thing for the right things. We don't do the right thing because someone's watching us or we could be arrested. And the reason why I'm saying that is if an inmate's trying to play a game on you or whatever, and you're catching these feelings, the inmate can make the promise that they'll never turn you in. And there goes the external consequence of anybody knowing of what you're doing. Well, yeah, but you still do. So inmates will do whatever they can to minimize that external consequence if that's how you want to live your career. And that shouldn't be how you want to live your career. If an inmate tries to play that game, say it really doesn't matter, what the consequences are. I'm not doing the right thing because I'm going to get punished for doing the wrong. I'm doing the right thing because I'm trusted. It's expected of me. It's what I'm about. I mean, that's probably the most important thing. It's what I'm about. And I want to say one more thing. You get the officers that come in, and I don't think it's an undue relationship when you just start having sex. That's the corruption. That's corrupt. But if there's something that was a relationship that led to that possibility, led to that being the final outcome. Because you have some people that could go in and think, hey, I'm just going to go screw around, or I'm going to go make some money, and they come up with already a corrupt mindset. That's not undue familiarity, just someone that's been corrupt since the get-go. But then you get some people that may not have had that mindset, and they wind up developing a relationship where the relationship supersede the professional role, and they truly get lost in what the final outcome is. And at the end of the day, it's really up to us as a team, but also yourself, to notice that you've crossed the line. And the last thing I want for anyone is when you feel conflict and you push it so far down that you start to justify the behaviors that you're doing, however unique you may think they are. So if I go in and try to say, yo, you're too close, and the first thing you say is, well, this inmate's okay. You're pushing a uniqueness, but that's already getting to a point where now you could kind of see the bias here. You can kind of see you're no longer thinking objectively the moment you think that this inmate is different than every other inmate. So just remember, I think in our efforts to make sure that we're supportive of each other, that this could be the undue familiarity is the process in which requires us to act on feeling and instinct. And that's where our trust has to be the greatest. Because if Russ came up to me without no evidence and just wanted to correct something that they saw, and Russ became more concerned about preserving the relationship than he did about, correcting what could be eventually something going wrong, then our relationship really can't be that strong, Russ. It can't be. Because at the end of the day, if me and you were boys, I'm not worried about preserving the relationship because we've earned it. I'm just going to go to you and say, hey, Russ, that didn't look right. I'll see you later. Boom. You know what I mean? And it's like, but then you get people like, well, if I say it and I'm wrong, our friendship could be gone. And motherfuckers, and you guys weren't really friends, because my friends correct me all the time. People that really care about me, that's their fucking job, is to correct me. And if they don't, I'm mad that they didn't tell me. As always, guys, the show is Tear Up. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.